I didn't think poorly of Shady. I had seen my share of folks who looked to a bottle of whiskey for whatever they'd lost. I believe Gideon himself might have looked there had he not been raising a daughter on the road. We stopped near Miss Sadie's place, and Shady took my bags. "Will I see you for dinner tonight?" he asked, seeming to acknowledge that I could still take off if I pleased. I wanted to ask him 100 questions. Why had Gideon closed himself to me? Why had he sent me away? And when would he come back? I wanted to tell Shady I had an old cork of his on my windowsill. A cork that had become special because it was part of a story. And I knew that story wasn't finished, but I also knew Shady wasn't the one to tell me the rest of it. "Depends," I said. "What's for supper?" "Oh, I'm fixing something special." "Let me guess. Beans and cornbread." "You picked at my menu," he said, pretending to be hurt, even though it didn't take a diviner to figure that out. "I'll be there. It sounds better than what I've got." I showed him my sack of skeleton weed, spiderwort, and toad flax. "Now, can you point me in the direction of some prickly poppy?" Miss Sadie's Divining Parlor, June 17th, 1936. Late that afternoon, I returned to Miss Sadie's place in a mood. Having crawled through a bramble brush for the prickly poppy, I was feeling a bit prickly myself just then. Why Miss Sadie had called to send me all over God's creation to dig up plants never intended for human use, I can't say. Her Divining Highness was not in sight when I arrived, so I busied myself with trying to find a pot or vase to put the flowers in. There was nothing on the back porch but a metal watering can and piles of dried up leaves that had been pushed into a corner. The gardening shed looked to be the likely place for a pot, but it was locked. I peeked through the dirty windows, trying to make out what was inside when, "Get away from there!" Miss Sadie hobbled from the side of the house. "There's nothing in there that you need," she said, breathing heavy from the effort. I held up my flour sack full of plants. "I got most of the ones you asked for. I was just looking for a planting pot." I noticed the wound on her leg. It was worse, all red and festering. "I can lance that for you, to let out the infection." Miss Sadie settled herself into the metal rocking chair, and her breathing slowed as if a crisis passed. "No." I didn't know what she was waiting for, but it was her leg. "Let me see." Her breathing was still heavy as she motioned toward the plants in my hand. She ran her fingertips all over them, feeling the stems, leaves, petals, smelling them like a blind person wanting to know what she could not see. "Aren't those the ones you wanted?" I asked. "They are, but they do not tell me what I wish to know." She gazed up into the cloudless sky. "The earth, it holds back secrets it is not willing to part with yet." Then, as if she had seen enough, she started taking the plants apart, expertly sorting leaves from stems, from seeds, creating small piles of each in her lap. "I went all over tarnation to get those for you, and all you wanted were some dead flowers?" "They are only dead to what they once were. Now they become something else. Go." Without looking up, she motioned to the dry ground of the garden. "Back to work." I looked at the rows of tilled-up soil, splayed out like open wounds, and did as I was told. My already blistered hands and scraped knees rebelled as the dust took over me like a swarm of bees. I went to the far end of the yard so I could grumble to myself without being heard. "The earth, it holds back secrets it's not willing to part with," I mimicked. "What a bunch of hooey," I said under my breath, tossing a dirt clod over my shoulder against the locked-up garden shed. I studied the little outpost, and feeling the diviner's eyes on me, I came back to the only reasonable conclusion. Miss Sadie was holding back a few secrets of her own. As the afternoon wore on, I began feeling like the miners from years ago, covered in grime. Tasting the dirt in my mouth, I imagined it to be the soot of the mines. Had their families recognized them when they emerged from their desolate work? Would anyone recognize me? Would anyone care? I was enjoying my pitiful thoughts. What if I died right there in that dirt? Would anyone notice? Death is like an explosion, Miss Sadie said, her accent thick, like the humid air that hovered heavy around me. It makes people take notice of things they have overlooked. I sat back on my haunches, annoyed that my sorrowful thoughts had not only been interrupted, but seemingly overheard. What was Miss Sadie talking about this time? Whose death? This is the way with the widow Kane. Her death causes people to notice things they have overlooked, she continued. My mind began to work backwards. I recalled the name. The abandoned mine shaft where Ned and Jinx had made their fireworks. It had been on the Widow Kane property near the mine. I tried to shut out the story I knew was coming, but Miss Sadie's words pulled me in. It was like being drawn out of the dark mine, only to emerge squinting into the bright light of day. I preferred to stay lost in the darkness of my dismal thoughts. Unbidden, Miss Sadie went on. Mr. Devlin and his mine people have a sudden interest in that little stretch of land near the edge of the woods that had before been only a pleasant spring and a shady place to sit between Manifest and the mine. I could hear it coming like a freight train, and there was no stopping it. I kept my back to her. Lester Burton, he goes back and forth across that stretch of land. He observes it from this way and that. They even call a new geologist to make out a report. The townspeople keep a watchful eye, but questions only among themselves. Keep talking. I'm not listening. Before long, Mr. Devlin pays himself visit to the public land office to inquire about purchasing the land now that the Widow Kane is dead. This is his mistake. Miss Larkin's neighbor works in that office. Mr. Devlin, he barely leaves his seat before half the town knows he wants to buy this land. I turned around, but only because I was at the end of a row and starting on another. He says he will use it as a picnic area for his miners to eat their lunch. It does not take a diviner to see that this is a lie. He barely gives the men time to eat, and they do that underground. Too much time is wasted coming up and going down for a few minutes of fresh air. The news spreads, and Haley and Giddon calls a meeting. They piece together what I could have told them all along. She let out a long pause, and I swear the words came out without my willing them to. Miss Sadie almost smiled. Where the grass grows thick and the animals refuse to burrow, there is ore below. I remembered something from an early part of Miss Sadie's stories. Jinx had seen Mr. Devlin arguing with the mine geologist. Had it been something about the coal vein taking a turn and going in the wrong direction? Was that what she was talking about? Miss Sadie picked up where my thoughts left off. The vein, it zigs where it should have zagged, and run under the patch of ground between Mr. Devlin's mine and the town of Manifest, the Widow Kane's property. Unfortunately, after her death, it was the only patch of ground that neither side could claim as their own. No Man's Land, July 20th, 1918. Jinx rushed headlong into Shady's place. Hey, Shady, you're not going to believe how many bottles I sold. He fanned a wad of money. Shady looked furtively towards the front door as dusk set in. Now's probably not a good time. Jinx continued, not noticing Shady's uneasiness. Your hooch and Bellomy-Ezell elixir are a match made in heaven. It's been less than 2 weeks, and just about everybody in town, quite a few of those folks are going to be showing up here any minute for Hadley's meeting. Why here? Because Hadley only invited 1 or 2 people from each fraternal order, and he doesn't want Burton knowing about it. After the cross burning in front of the German hall, folks are a little on edge, but they're coming in, and the way Laura Larkin's been dodging me all week after that episode at the Women's Temperance League meeting, I have a feeling she'll not be far behind them. Your elixir made a lasting impression on her. Jink's mouth dropped open. She bought a bottle from Bellomy-Ezell, not me. Besides, who told her to drink a whole bottle in one setting? He hesitated. Do you think she knows we did a little tampering with it? You've been selling it all over town, so I think she might have a pretty good idea. Jinx grimaced. Well, there was extra, and I figured I was doing Bellomy-Ezell a favor to get her elixir out amongst the ailing public. I'm sure that was your utmost priority, Shady said with a sideways glance. They heard footsteps crunching on the gravel outside. Quick, Shady whispered. He hoisted up a movable panel behind the bar that revealed a hidden stash of whiskey bottles. What's that for? Jinx asked in astonishment. It's for hiding things. What's it look like? Get in and stay there. Jinx barely had time to stuff his wad of money into his overalls and crawl inside before the front door opened. The space was dark and cramped. Jinx shifted to find a more comfortable position and noticed a pinhole of light. He strained to reach it and placed his eye against the perfect peephole, through which he could see most of the bar's sitting area of a small wooden table and chairs. It was Chester Thornhill who arrived. Chester was a regular customer who knew nothing of any meeting. Evening, Shady. I'll have a shot. Jinx heard Shady behind the bar. Evening, Chester. Gonna have a quick one tonight? I bet the missus is waiting for you. I'm in no hurry, Chester said. The front door opened again and more people arrived. Jinx watched from his hiding place. Chairs shifted and scraped against the dusty floor as people took their seats and eyed each other without speaking. There had never been a town meeting before. Normally, each fraternal order would gather in their own hall and discuss their own business. On occasion, there might be an awkward encounter in the mercantile or the hardware store, in which members of one nationality might exchange a halted word of greeting with those with another. Even in church, folks pretty much kept to their own. Among the Catholics, the Australians went to Mass at 8 o'clock, Italians at 9 o'clock, and Irish at 10 o'clock. Services were divided up similarly among the Lutherans and Methodists. But in light of the recent goings-on at the mine, the cross burning at the German Fraternal Hall, and the widow Kane's death, the whole town was abuzz, with everyone's wanting to talk, and more than the usual desire not to be noticed by Burton and his pit boys. Representatives of each nationality and a few others had been asked to the secret meeting at Shady's place. Chester Thornhill, one of Burton's crew, had not been invited, but here he was, smack in the middle of it. Wide-eyed, Chester sipped his drink as Bellomy-Ezell Harkrader arrived. Soon after, Ulf and Greta Ackerson of Norway took their seats. The Ackersons were the driest couple in town. When they started munching on a few beer nuts, it was too much for Chester to swallow. What's going on here, Shady? Chester blustered as Casimir and Eddie Cyprus from Poland joined the growing crowd, their 4-year-old daughter Eva in tow.